What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Nick 4K video. Today we're checking out a video from Kane Varner, and his video is titled "The Downfall of the Pirates Franchise Was Crazy." So before we jump into this, I do want to say I actually really enjoy all the Pirates movies. When they were coming out, I think I remember liking the first one. I really liked the second and third one. I know that kind of got some hate back in the day, but I do like those. And then the fourth one I didn't really care about, and the fifth one I also completely ignored. And then about 2 years ago, I had a hankering to watch all of them, so I just sat down, got on Disney Plus. I just watched all 5 of them, and honestly, I really liked the franchise. And the ones that I thought were worse, or like the bad elements of those worst movies, I actually ended up liking a lot more this time. So maybe it's because I went into those worst movies like 4 and 5. I went into those thinking they were going to be absolute trash. And actually, they were pretty good and fun. So it's one of those things like, sure, the quality was definitely not there compared to the original film. But overall, these films, especially like the last 2, get a little more hate than they deserve. So in this video, he's probably going to be covering that. So with that said, guys, make sure to like, subscribe, turn notifications for more videos, and let's begin.
The Pirates of the Caribbean franchise has taken a turn for the worse in recent years. In light of recent controversies surrounding some of the castmates, I will simply be talking about the quality of the films as a whole, rather than personal opinions regarding the cast and crew. I also just want to preface that everything I say in this video is just an opinion. I'm not going to necessarily be recapping the series, but I will be talking about the alarming downfall of the series ever since the first trilogy ended in 2007. The first Pirates of the Caribbean film is truly a great one, and I will die on that hill. I also loved the second and third films as well, but the problems really begin with the fourth and fifth films. Today in this video, I will be covering everything wrong with the final 2 films and why I think the trilogy is unmatched to this day. The first Pirates of the Caribbean film is of course amazing, and I think it definitely deserves to be a contender for the best of the franchise. The film only has a few slight issues from my point of view. The Curse of the Black Pearl is so good due to the way in which it handles its characters and how they affect the plot. Each of the characters are so clear and different from each other. Will and Elizabeth are definitely 2 rather bland people, but have some small quirks that set them apart from the bland, hot archetypes that they fit into. Will actually kind of reminds me of Wesley from Princess Bride. He even comes equipped with his own mysterious Flynn Rider Smolder.
100%.
This character type can be endlessly boring on paper, but the writers add a lot of depth to Will that not even Orlando Bloom could fuck up. Throughout the film, he constantly calls his past into question. It seems like every other person around him seems to know something about him that he doesn't. Jack obviously uses his knowledge of Will's father to his advantage when bargaining with Barbossa on multiple occasions throughout the film, which furthers the plot. This is a wonderful example of the domino effect that can occur when you let your characters build up your story rather than having your story build up its characters. There are multiple examples of this kind of storytelling throughout the trilogy, and I could talk for hours about how the characters influence the plot. To me, a story almost always comes off as stronger when it's told this way. Other than Will, Elizabeth is also kind of used this way. At the start of the film, the pressure put on her character to marry Commodore Norrington is figuratively represented by the tightness of her corset. When she asks her father why she must wear the dress and conform to high society, he replies that it's what every woman in London is wearing. A little bit later on, it's only after Norrington proposes to Elizabeth that this literal and metaphorical pressure bursts and she falls into the water from a great height, which again drives the plot forward. It ultimately all stems from Elizabeth's unwillingness to conform to high society and its standards. This is another great example of character traits driving the plot. The best part about framing a story this way is it's a great way to use subtlety to reveal character traits. Elizabeth doesn't just come out and say, "I hate wearing dresses because it represents wealth inequality and I don't want to represent that," because that would just be ludicrous to just blurt out in the 1730s. She instead says,
"Well, women in London must have learnt not to breathe."
When she falls off the cliff, she is in part doing so because of the pure shock and disappointment of the proposal. The opening flashback of the film lays the groundwork for Elizabeth's fascination with pirates. This, paired along with the fact that she finds Will so exciting in the present day scene, reveals to us her true desire is to flee the port and live a more adventurous life. Okay, so now we know that the story of this film is conveyed through the actions of the characters and not the other way around, but what about the characters themselves? What makes Jack, Barbossa, Norrington, Will, and Elizabeth so great? Well, each character has a role to play. There aren't any unnecessary characters clogging up the story and stealing time from the others. Every single one of them gets to shine in their own way for the appropriate amount of time. Many will argue that as the films go on, Jack steals a lot of the spotlight from the rest of the cast, and that's probably true, but I'm not going to focus on that. For now, let me move on to Barbossa and his...
But let's be honest, that's okay. Like, for what like Jack's character is so like funny and just like entertaining, and that's what people came to see. You know, Will was cool, Elizabeth was cool, every other character was cool, even Barbossa, he was a beast. I actually think that Barbossa gets better as the movies go on. People might get mad at me for that, but I think he gets better when he becomes more of an anti-hero and less of the actual villain. But that's just my thought on that. But ultimately we came for Johnny Depp, and so that's why the pirate movies became so popular, because of Jack Sparrow. That might just be my opinion, like I said. So it completely makes sense why Jack is kind of, you know, really thrust forward in the rest of these films, where Will and Liz aren't even in the fourth one, and then they show up again in the fifth one, type of thing. So like, they're still good characters. You know, you can't really say they're bad characters, but they're not the reason why you come to watch these movies. You come for Jack, and the studio knows that.
His performance in the film because it is excellent. The filmmakers knew that in order to create a perfect villain, Barbossa had to be more than two-dimensional. They added the ghost pirate element to Barbossa's crew in order to instill layers to his wants and needs, but also to service the story, which ultimately revolves around Barbossa's crew trying to break a curse placed on them. Jeffrey Rush is just too good in this film. I just don't think you guys understand.
He is amazing.
I feel nothing. Not the wind on my face, nor the spray of the sea, nor the warmth of a woman's flesh.
Yeah, for sure. Jack and Barbossa, perfectly cast. Perfect. Down to the last minute detail. It's just how, like, Robert Downey Jr. is perfect for Iron Man, you know? It's perfect.
You best start believing in ghost stories, Miss Turner. You're in one.
He is the perfect foil for the uncoordinated, fumbling Jack. Barbossa and Jack kind of have this tug of war with each other throughout the film, and it makes for some really hilarious gags. The fight between the two towards the end is also amazing and really well choreographed. And finally, it wouldn't be a Pirates of the Caribbean video essay unless I spoke on the star of the show, Captain Jack Sparrow. From his introduction scene where he sails into the port on a sinking ship, the audience immediately knows something about Jack. He's a survivor. Jack spends a lot of this film outsmarting people. It's kind of like his whole character, like when he's banished to an island by Barbossa before returning to confront him in the treasure cave later on. Jack seriously finds a way out of almost any situation he's placed in. The film itself wouldn't be as successful.
Jack is like scrappy. Like, Jack is like Han Solo. You know, he's scrappy. You know, and that's both a positive and a negative for him, because him being scrappy gets him into sketchy situations, right? But him also being scrappy gets him out of sketchy situations. So it's great. It's such a good character.
Successful without Johnny Depp in it. I don't think it would have been as big of a deal or succeeded as a series had he not been cast in it. Captain Jack Sparrow eventually leads the films as more of a protagonist, but in this film he's sort of like a glorified side character. Will
He's
and
the Han
Elizabeth
Solo.
are definitely our main protagonists in this film, but Jack eventually does take the lead, which is also a very Jack thing to do if you think about it. I just love this film. I think most people will write off the film because it's associated with the other films, and they genuinely forget how great the first film is, and just how great the trilogy is on its own. The second film, titled Dead Man's Chest, is genuinely so good on its own, but what I think is more important to note about it is it sets up the original ending that was meant for all of these characters before Disney went to town and oversaturated the series. A lot of second films tend to fail to live up to the original story in a series, but Dead Man's Chest just is not one of those examples. Dead Man's Chest introduces us to so many new characters and locations while keeping what felt magical about the first film. When Jack is reintroduced in this film, his first scene perfectly echoes his introduction in the first film. Instead of being a down-on-his-luck pirate riding into town on a sinking ship, he's a pirate on his deathbed. Well, not literally, he's just pretending to be dead inside of a coffin. The audience is never told why Jack is in this coffin or why he was buried at sea, nor why his ship was sinking in the first film. Subsequently, we learn what Jack is after in this film, a key. This directly leads him and many other parties.
See, okay, so here's the thing. here's the thing, like he mentioned, we're not told why he's in these situations, but because of his character being written so well, and because we know him to be like a sketchy, scrappy character, we don't need that explanation. You know what I mean? Like, we instantly know, like, he did something, he fucked up somewhere, right? And he got out of it. So you don't have to worry about any extra elements to it. His character sells the reason without even having to know it. So I love it. So good.
Chase to find a chest that contains the heart of Davy Jones, an undead half-squid, half-human pirate. The whole reason Jack is in search of this chest is to try and take control of the mantle of Davy Jones, in addition to sparing himself a spot on Davy Jones's crew. In his mind, his worries would all be resolved with a knife to the heart that lays inside the chest. Speaking of Davy Jones, look at this CGI. The sheer craftsmanship that went into this is crazy. Also, this was released 18 years ago. Why does this look better than 90% of Marvel films
so
today?
good.
It's
so
genuinely
good.
upsetting how far major studios have fallen. Anyway, yes, Davy Jones is such a goofy ass little villain, but he's still really believable, and I think he follows Barbossa really well. I love his cadence and his accent the most about his performance. I really think the way he talks is just so interesting. Like, it's just such a rare accent for me as an American viewer to hear. They managed to make him so goofy while also being scary. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is a hashtag independent woman in this film, as she tricks a ship full of men into thinking that she's a male, and even pulls off this cunty little production to get them to sail to the town in which Jack is making port out of, so that she can sail alongside him in order to rescue Will from Davy Jones. I love this scene in the tavern when they find out that Norrington has become a drunk, where Elizabeth ultimately sees what happened to her former fiance in the year since the last film. Tia Dalma is also a wonderful addition to the cast of characters. I love her shack and all these cool trinkets in and around it. It feels really real and lived in. I'm also so glad that they included her because she absolutely steals the show when she's on screen. Even if I didn't really understand what she was saying as a kid because her accent is so thick, I was so intrigued by her and the oddities around her shop that I didn't really need to understand what she was talking about. It was just so intriguing on its own. Most of the characters kind of remain the same from the end of the last film. The only thing that changes are the relationships between them. For example, at the end of the first film, both Will and Elizabeth grow to respect Jack and appreciate him after he helped them multiple times throughout. But in this film, their trust in him wanes a little bit because Jack is really only out for himself, and when his goals no longer align with theirs, they have a more tainted image of him. Particularly Elizabeth, who also seems to have a bit of a crush on him at times throughout the film, which is represented by this scene of her using Jack's compass to find what she truly wants. Hoping it'll point to Will, she watches it point straight at Jack. At the end of the film, after multiple betrayals on Jack's part, Elizabeth has had enough and changed Jack to the sinking ship while it awaits the Kraken's wrath. Lastly, I'd love to talk about the Kraken, which doesn't really feel like a huge part of the film, and that's because they knew to keep its appearance very hidden the first few times it was on screen in order to build intrigue. Once Jack stares it down at the end of the film, the audience finally has a full view of the behemoth. I also love this last scene so much.
You will need a captain who knows those waters.
Yeah, this surprised me in the theaters when I saw this.
So tell me, what's become of my ship?
Bringing Barbossa back from the dead is one of the only times I will defend resurrecting characters in film because I just love him so much.
Yeah.
And I think it really helps build excitement for what's to come in the final film. The last
For
film
sure.
of the original trilogy is definitely my least favorite of the first three. It's a little too long in my opinion and has some pacing issues, but all of it is saved by the third act of the film, which is absolutely perfect in my opinion. The final battle is just too good. Those are really the only negatives I can think of. I really love the fact that they did take their time to get Jack back, and it wasn't just done and over with within the first 10 minutes of the film. The team of Barbossa, Elizabeth, and Will work together in order to assemble the Brethren Court of Pirates to take a stand against Beckett. It's so interesting to see all the different cultures come together in one meeting room.
So, something I always thought was interesting about this. So the first movie is like its own standalone story, right? And then the second and third movie are kind of like one big movie. Like, you don't necessarily have to watch the first movie to understand the second and third. It's interesting when movies do that, or like franchises do that, I should say. Like Rocky. Rocky's probably the best example I can think of for everyone who's probably seen Rocky. Pretty much everyone has seen Rocky, but Rocky is kind of like part one to Rocky 2, right? Like Rocky 1 and 2 are like part 1 and part 2. They feel like they're a cohesive, connected story. It takes place right after the first one, right? So there's like this this cohesion that these two movies have, that like when Rocky 3 comes along, it's its own standalone story. So while all the movies are canonically connected, it definitely feels like Rocky 1 and 2 are kind of like its own story. Like that's number 1. And then Rocky 3 is like Rocky 2, and then, you know, so on and so forth and what have you. So that's kind of how I always felt about the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. It feels like the first movie is a standalone film. The second and third are kind of their own standalone film. And then there's the other ones after that. So it never bothered me in the past, because that's kind of how the Lord of the Rings movies are. Like, they're all standalone movies, right? But it's actually just like one big movie, effectively. So it's one of those things I always thought was interesting, because most movies, at this time especially, they would just do standalone movie, standalone movie, standalone movie. Yes, they're connected, but ultimately these are separate stories. Where this was a time where movies didn't do this. They didn't have, you know, one big movie over multiple films besides Lord of the Rings. That's the only one who really did that at the time. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
It really allows the audience to learn about the lore of the pirates as a whole, which I really do believe is needed, especially here in the finale when all of them are being hunted. There's no better way to get us to care about a group of people and the fate of them than to tell us about their history. Davy Jones was the main villain of the last film, and in this film, he's essentially treated as a dog on a leash by Cutler Beckett. Beckett's entire mission is to destroy piracy, and he's using Jones to do so. We learned that long ago, the Brethren Court first assembled in order to bind the goddess Calypso in human form. We come to realize that Tia Dalma is Calypso herself. She's also the woman that Davy Jones loves, which was teased in the last film. Jack and his crew, along with the other ships from the Brethren Court, try to set her free in order to destroy the British fleet. She eventually creates a maelstrom, which lays the scene for the final battle. The final battle lasts nearly an hour and pits every major character of the last 3 films against the entire East India Trading Company and the Royal Navy, who have Davy Jones and the Flying Dutchman on their side.
Yeah, this
Jack,
final fight
Will,
was epic.
and Elizabeth make it onto the Flying Dutchman. It is here where Will is stabbed by Davy Jones, which leads Jack to hand the heart of Davy Jones to Will in order for Will to stab it, thus making him the captain of the Flying Dutchman, and in turn, killing Davy Jones for good. The maelstrom closes and the Endurance is destroyed by the Pearl and the Flying Dutchman. And this shot right here is so amazing. The end of the trilogy
shot.
sees Will
So
and Elizabeth in their final moments together on land for the next 10 years, as Will is now binded to the Dutchman. Captain Barbossa abandons Jack, but before he can savor it, he realizes that Jack stole his map to the Fountain of Youth, which will totally not become important in the next film. Like, at all. The first 3 films are so well crafted from not only a storytelling perspective, but also a visual perspective as well. I genuinely don't get the same excitement in the final 2 films as I do with the first 3. It's really hard to try and compare the 4th and 5th to try and decide which one is worse, because they both have issues and each has something the other doesn't, making both feel bad in their own ways. On Stranger Tides has issues that stem...
Okay, before we jump into these last 2, because these are the ones that people don't like. I specifically remember back in the day people not liking the second movie. I remember the first movie people liking and people liking the third one. But I specifically remember the Dead Man's Chest being more crapped upon back in the day. So it seems like the zeitgeist has changed, and now the original trilogy is actually really good and the newer ones are bad. So it's very similar to how Star Wars works. How like the prequels were considered trash for a long time for a lot of people, and now as the sequels have come out, people have seen actually, you know, the prequels is actually pretty good. So now the prequels are considered good too. It's funny how people are, but I just think that's interesting.
from a lack of structure to the story. It's a fairly simple and straightforward affair compared to the previous installments, making it feel less important, and I oftentimes feel like skipping it on my rewatches. The stellar cast from the original trilogy is essentially reduced to just Johnny Depp, Jeffrey Rush, and Kevin McNally. The film seriously feels like an unneeded spin-off where Jack has now become the focus of the series, and as fun as this exploration of the Fountain of Youth can be at times, it ultimately is fleeting. I do, however,
that's the best idea. He just mentioned about spin-off. That's what it feels like. I will 100% say that. This feels like not like an official Pirates of the Caribbean movie. It feels like it is a Jack's Adventure type of film. You know, like, hey, here's Pirates 1, here's Pirates 2, here's Pirates 3, here's Jack's Adventure, and then like the fifth movie kind of ties back into the original squad. So that kind of feels like the actual number 4. I think it's still like an okay movie though. Like, it's actually okay. I think it is the worst out of all of them. But still, I think it's still entertaining. And I always say this, but regardless of how good or bad a movie is, ultimately it comes down to, is it entertaining? Is there any entertainment value to it? Because we go to movies, we see movies to be entertained, regardless of what movie you're watching. You're watching a horror, you're watching a action, you're watching a superhero movie, you're watching a historical epic. It's one of those things where it's got to be entertaining. If it's not entertaining, it's not good. And this movie is entertaining, so there is some type of good quality to it from that perspective anyways.
Love that Ian McShane was added to the cast as Captain Blackbeard. He's a much more serious villain than Barbossa and Davy Jones, who both came off as a bit cartoonish, but like in a good way. Either way, the plot essentially revolves around Blackbeard's daughter, played by Penelope Cruz, trying to use Jack to lead them to the fountain in order to save Blackbeard from his fate. All of this stuff could have made for a fun blockbuster, in my opinion. All the pieces were there for sure, and trust me, the film has its moments. The other side characters that have absolutely nothing to do with the main plot are so boring. I do not care about pre-Hunger Games Sam Claflin trying to stop the crew from mistreating a random mermaid that they found while being attacked by other mermaids. They're really just trying to copy and replace what Will and Elizabeth brought to the table in the original trilogy, and it just really doesn't work in my opinion, because both of these characters are severely underwritten.
The thing is, here's the thing. They're really attractive though. Two really attractive people. So you instantly do feel that connection. You want to care about them because they're good looking. But think of it this way. If they were cast by two actors who aren't considered, hot, would we care about their story? I don't think so. It really is. We care about their story because the actors are good looking. If they weren't good looking, we wouldn't care. That's just the truth.
And you'd be surprised how long it takes for him to show up. I love him in this wig though. In fact, let me just point out the fact that the costuming and sets of this film are impeccable. This film definitely has my favorite locations as well of the entire series. Also, fun fact, it may have been dethroned by now, but as of its release, On Stranger Tides was the most expensive film ever made. So that's probably why it's so fucking gorgeous to look at. I'm honestly really glad that this film wasn't the final installment in the franchise, because the ending of it isn't as good as I would want it to be. Plus, 4 is just such an unsatisfying length for a film series. You either stop at a trilogy or you keep going past 4. Anyway, this film has its moments, but across as a little bit less important in the grand scheme of things. It's not bad or badly made, and that's something I really want to stress before we enter the final installment of this franchise, which slips so far in quality. Honestly, it's shocking to me how different it is from the other films that came before it. And we've finally come to the final film I will be speaking on today. There are just so many problems here, and I just want to get all of my issues with Jack out of the way. Acting like himself in this film. Johnny Depp is almost playing a caricature of himself in this film. There's actually a great video that explains perfectly how I feel about Johnny Depp's performance in this film, and I'll link it in the description for anyone interested who hasn't seen it yet. Jack is the main reason why this film suffers, to be honest. The story also just has so many issues, and I'm not exactly sure why. The script was written by half the duo that brought us the first 3 films, so you'd think that the 5th film would be almost like a return to form after the 4th film, which felt a little off, but no, not at all. The story...
Okay, so I've only watched this movie one time. Same with the 4th one. I watched the first 3 a lot back when I was a kid, but after rewatching them 2 years ago, I remember liking the 5th one more than the 4th one. So maybe I have to rewatch it again, but I liked that maybe this movie is better if you watch it in a binge. Like, that's how I watched it. I watched 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and so this movie was pretty good because I watched it in a binge. It's the same thing with the Indiana Jones movies. Like, I actually like 4 and 5 because I watched them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? I watched them in an order. So it worked better for me. So maybe as a standalone film, though, I would consider this movie to be worse. But based off of binge order, I actually do like this one more than the fourth one. So that's just my opinion, though.
In this film ultimately tries to rely on nostalgia by bringing in Will in one of the opening scenes to introduce us to his son, who I'll get to later, and by the end of the film using Elizabeth and Will for absolutely no other reason than to remind us about the other better films in the franchise.
Yeah.
I mean, Keira Knightley showed up on set for probably a day, because she just couldn't be bothered to do anything else. Other characters like Captain Barbossa shine to an extent, but again, his character is kind of written like a cheap imitation of Barbossa at times. The daughter of Barbossa and the son of Will and Elizabeth get together in this film, sort of, and let me just tell you, they have absolutely no chemistry, which honestly gives me war flashbacks to the last film with the mermaid and Finnick Odair. Beyond them, the villain is just not that good in my opinion. Performance-wise, Javier Bardem...
Okay, I'll say this. I actually do like the main actors. The main younger actors. I think that I see the argument. I see that there's not as much chemistry between them compared to like Will and Liz had in the first 3 movies, but I would say that they were still pretty good. There's definitely some more developing that needs to be happening, but it's also like their characters are still different from Will and Liz, although they are kind of similar too. But it's one of those things where maybe a couple more movies that could develop better. But they definitely feel like there is something off. I still believe it, though. I still think that there could be something there, so...
is great. Maybe a little bit too campy and goofy, but that's how I personally like my Pirates of the Caribbean performances. The problems lie in his character motivations, which do little to make him three-dimensional. He wants revenge on Jack Sparrow for leading him into the Devil's Triangle years prior. This raises questions like, why did it take him so long to get to Jack? Why have we never heard about this guy before? And they don't really spend that much time developing him or any other characters really in this film. There is one flashback that does a little bit, but other than that, it's really nothing. The only other time we really see his character is when he shows up with this pretty mid CGI underwater hair flowy thing while spewing out black goo from his mouth, which I guess makes him cool. The plot revolves around Jack working together with Henry and Karina to find the Trident of Poseidon to break all of the sea curses in order to free Will from being the new Davy Jones, which ultimately breaks the canon established in the third film that someone always needs to be the captain of the Flying Dutchman. Ultimately, there are a lot of issues here, and sometimes I find it really hard to rank it below the fourth film. While that...
Okay, so I can explain that because I actually remember. So the Trident pretty much holds all magic powers, right? So they explained it in the movie, but I'll just explain it right now. It's tied to all the magic in like the sea type of thing. So when the Trident was destroyed, all that magic got unbound as well. So Will no longer is bound to the Dutchman anymore. That's how that is explained, and that's why all of his guys get out of there too. So there you go. There's a little tidbit for you.
Film might feel unimportant and boring at times, it still has its moments. This film, however, is just so generic and tries to live off the nostalgia of the trilogy that only ended a decade prior. The characters are all really unlikable, and the dialogue is just so bad compared to the other films. The majority of the issues stem from the script and Johnny Depp's acting, but there are some remnants of a good story here. I think it just needed a few more years in the oven and it would have been a better sequel. So I will leave you with this question. Why are they making 2 more films in this series if the last 2 did not do well at all? Why are they making them without Johnny Depp? I mean, I know practically why they're not making them without Johnny Depp. His image in the last few years has not been the most clean. At that point, why even make a sequel at all? I genuinely do not see the films doing well without him. I'm not sure it's the smartest move to completely rip the main character of a series from said series because that character is so tightly associated with it. I truly hope that this franchise can recover, but it doesn't look too good, especially after the fiasco that was the 5th film. However, we still have 3 amazing films that not only hold up to today's standards, but in my opinion, completely surpass them. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. I know it was a little bit different than my normal videos because I don't normally do voiceover, but I really wanted to take a chance and try something new while I'm working on my other videos. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.
All right. Hey, good video there, Kane. I actually heard that he is going to return for the next one now. Initially, during all that stuff that happened with Amber Heard and stuff, that's all past now. So he is returning now from what I heard. I could be wrong now, but I'm sure that news is constantly changing. But I heard he is going to come back, and it's going to be like him and Margot Robbie doing stuff together. So I think that's going to be pretty good. Even if it's more of like Margot is the new main character and Jack's just in the universe somewhere and he shows up occasionally. But what do you guys think? How do you feel about the Pirates of the Caribbean movies? Do you think the 4th and 5th movie are really as bad as people say? Or do you think it is just as good? Or do you just not care about these movies? Do you think they were bad since the beginning? Let me know in the comments below. I think there's going to be a lot of people out there who really liked the first one, thought the 2nd and 3rd were okay, and then the 4th and 5th were just trash. And that's how I was kind of viewing it before I went to rewatch them 2 years ago. And then when I did, I ended up liking them all a lot. So I don't know, it's just as time goes on, things change, we all change, and opinions change. So that's the way it is. But thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.